Thanks very much, Shelley. Good evening. Kia ora. This is Lately with Karen Hay. And tonight on the show, law employment expert Max Whitehead joins me in the studio for a chat about what he calls the gig economy.
Hi, Karen.
That story about the Business Advisory Council, what do you think will be more useful to New Zealand? The Big Business Council, or the advice coming from them, or the advice that's coming from the Small Business Council that reports to Stuart Nash?
I've got a lot of time for this, Cameron Bagbury, because it's the hidden voice in New Zealand, and he's onto it. I mean, he's an economist, isn't he? And someone who's worth listening to is Cameron. But there's no voices for small business, really. The larger business organisations say that they represent them, but you don't get them heard. I notice on the advisory committee that there are some representations from the ministers. There is a ministry of small business, which has a few people on it. Those guys on that are very strongly slanted towards entrepreneurialism, and they're looking at overseas contracts and getting work out there, which is great for our economy. But what really happens is 50% of New Zealand employees are employed by small businesses, and there's no voice for them. There's nothing.
That's a business of 20 or less? Or
yes,
fewer?
20 people or less. Yeah, you're right. We've had this discussion before in other places, yes. But it certainly is. And it just is a great lead into what I wanted to talk about tonight, and that's the gig economy.
Right, the gig economy. It took me a while to work out what this was, but it's going from gig to gig.
Yes, because I've been saying for years that, you know, we're going to become a nation of contractors. And then I read this article just recently, and I thought, oh, it's the gig economy. That's the flash term for the academics that is saying it. Now, what's happening is that workers are preferring to actually, not all workers, but a large proportion of them are preferring to be contractors or becoming casual employees or part-timers. Now, I went to the Department of Statistics tonight and had a look at that. And what it says is that only 20% of those workers actually would prefer to have more hours. So 80% of those people there, which is a third of our working population, would prefer to have more hours, which I thought it was the other way around at least. So it does say a lot. Our whole world and the nature of work is changing dramatically.
Why? What's the bonus?
It's a key question, and this research examines it, and it goes across all generations and all demographics, but primarily this is the way he explains it. Like the baby boomers, they want to top up their pension, so they'll work and do a little bit of contract work from time to time, and that suits them. And then there's the Gen Z. They like the work-life balance and prefer spending time with family and being home, and so they will do high-powered work because normally they've been around as well, so they've got some skills, and they would rather work for a higher lot of earnings but less time. And then, of course, the new millenniums and the Gen Z, I think they call them, don't they? Just loves the flexibility. They want to run their own lives. And, you know, Karen, I had a guy in my office. I just love this guy. I wanted him to take over my business. Very clever young guy, 25. And he said, nah, I can't be committed to you, Max. I love working with you, but I can't be committed. And he liked working there. And I was so frustrated, but now I understand him because it's this whole generation. They don't want to be committed like you and I were for years to lock in a business for 15 years or more, which sounds terrible now. Most of us lock in for 3 years, but they even think that's too long.
Well, it all sounds very wonderful, but what about the money?
Oh, the money. Oh, no, well, they'd like rather work for high amounts of money for shorter periods of time.
But how can you be assured of high amounts of money?
This new generation, money doesn't drive them as much as it did you and I. Well, you know, I'm older than you, but certainly our generation is just driven by more and more and more and more.
No, but there's still rent to pay.
Oh, yes.
And that's not to be sniffed at, the cost of rent and all the costs that a young person or old person is faced with these days.
It's not easy. No, I give it to you, but that's their mindset is a preference of not to be locked into a work and having to work those constant hours. If they can find something else to do, it'll be part-time, they will. But the point I'm really making is that we're moving into this whole new world of work, and the work thing is completely changing. And the employment laws are making it harder, so people are finding any other way to avoid it. Do you know there's 7 pieces of new laws coming up which are actually going to inhibit some of this flexibility? Well, about 5 of them will. But
and off the top of your head, can you remember them?
Well, just so happens I can. So there's the amendments to the Employment Relations Act. So what that is encouraging and going to force employers into collective bargaining, that's one shoe fits all. So I'm guessing the hours of work could be part of that as well. And there will be
No matter what size business you have.
the way, yeah, well, it's currently if there is a collective in place, what they're saying is then the union can approach another business and saying, you're in the same business, we want you onto that collective.
Oh, okay.
So,
yep.
so that one contract will go for everybody. The fair pay, wow, fantastic term. Everyone's into that, fair pay. But what that means is a pay system for all for categories of employees across the whole of New Zealand. So radio announcers will be getting on a category, perhaps administration workers, perhaps whatever it might be. So that's their dream, and that's what they propose to put up. And they'll have a minimum rate of pay. And in Australia they have this, and they also have hours of workers locked into that as well.
How does that work in terms of your status within that industry or experience?
This is the minimum rate for that particular occupation.
It's the minimum rate.
Yep. So your employer can give you more if he wants to.
Yeah.
But not less.
Yes.
Not less than the rate. So yeah, it's a minimum.
So when is this law coming in?
Well, I think they were talking about the end of this year, but I think it might be held up until next year because employers are pushing back on this one, and the businesses. So there's a lot of exciting stuff coming up right now. But these will inhibit some of this. Where our nations are, where the whole global workforce are going to, they want to work part-time. They don't want to be locked into these collectives. Really, they don't. There are parts of them that do.
That's 2, so there's 5 more.
Right. The Equal Pay and Amendment Bill. So the Equal Pay, which is going to enable women in certain industries to go in for collective increases. That will mean all of those people will be bound into those. There'll be an extra pay, whether the hours will be adjusted as well, because they're just minimum terms and conditions. It's a possibility. There's another part to that act, but probably won't affect too much of this. The dependent contractors. So what the government's also indicating is that they're going to pass legislation so contractors have minimum entitlements. Now that will be, I'm guessing, like hours of work pay, perhaps redundancy entitlements. Who knows?
Redundancy
Could be.
That's unknown with a contract, isn't it?
It is, but it's dependent contractors. So contractors who are actually, England's got this already. So contractors who are going to spending more time and dependent on one particular business, then that business, with this legislation passes, and I think it will, then the business will have to give them minimum entitlements. So all these things will be, it's one shoe fits all again, and it's going to sort of inhibit some of the flexibility we're wanting in our society. But that's the counter. There's a lot of positives with this.
In your opinion.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of pay increases coming up for a lot of people. And the Domestic Violence Act, well, I don't think that's going to really inhibit it. It gives people more holidays if they have been subjected to domestic violence at some time in their life. And that could have been in their childhood, but this enables them to get another 2 weeks holiday on pay at their whim. And there is good reason for that for some cases. But
when you say at their whim, that's not going to be easy for them to have to talk about that. It won't be a whim, surely.
No. Well, all they have to do is notify their employer that they're feeling depressed or upset because of their violence that they've been subjected to, and they'd like to take advantage of their entitlement to an extra 2 weeks' pay or 2 weeks off work, and the employer's got to facilitate that.
In your experience, do you think many people will take that up?
I don't think so. I think some will abuse it. I do. I think there will be a small proportion, but normally there's a stigma goes with admitting to you've been subjected to domestic violence. But I have had one situation where one lady was sent to work to tell them that she'd been subjected to domestic violence. This is before the act even came out. What that was about was to try and get the employer to say goodbye to her and to get some money. They were desperate for drugs, which is really sad, really sad. And she was subjected to domestic violence and gangs and all sorts of things.
Okay, so these 7 pieces of legislation, or under one piece of legislation, is that all going to be voted for at the same time?
No, these are all coming in bit by bit.
Oh, I see.
The Domestic Violence Act already in place. The amendments to the Employment Relations Act currently going through its readings now. So I'm saying that'll probably in the next few months that'll be finally passed. Fair pay still in the planning. There is a Holidays Act changes coming up where all they're saying is they're going to provide for flexibility in that, which is great. I'm so pleased about that. The Equal Pay Amendment Bill is out. That bill's currently going through its process and submissions are going through it. And I'm putting one in on that one. So I'm quite interested in these things, obviously.
And in your day-to-day business, what is the one issue that keeps coming up for you at the moment?
Oh, it's easy. It's so easy. It's so common. Bullying. Bullying is every day, almost every personal grievance I get. It's because it's the go-to if you're being subjected to, hey, you need to increase your performance. It's the go-to for anything else, but it's genuinely, there is some bullying going on out there. And there's those people who think they're being bullied, but actually probably just getting some constructive criticism. So, but it's a word overused everywhere. And it's real. We do have a nation of bullying that goes on, but also we do have it where it's actually used as a bit of a weapon as well. So, it's not, it certainly is a lot to do with my work at the moment.
Max, thank you very much for your
Oh,
time.
love coming in, Karen. Thanks for having me, by the way.
You're welcome.